welcome everyone. Can you hear me well on this mic, right? And you want me to keep this mic going, right? Okay, wonderful, wonderful. Well, first of all, thank you everyone for being here. I think it's wonderful to be in Lahore. It's wonderful to see the sun outside. The winter sun. Nothing better than the winter sun in Lahore. So it's excellent. But also, I want to thank you because you've actually, decided to come here and spend time with us, right? You have many competing interests. So, but I promise this is going to be a really exciting session and a very important one as well. So, thank you for joining us. And so, we're going to spend 1 hour together. And the idea is that, during that 1 hour, we will spend time understanding, how do we build a green workforce, right? Where do we get the right skills? And the reason why this is an important topic is because when you look at Pakistan, you know, um, we call Pakistan as ground zero when it comes to climate. Right? We're one of the most vulnerable countries just because of our geography, right? You have on one side you have the glaciers. Warming weather is causing a lot of that glacier melt. 90% or of our population actually relies on the Indus. Like it's actually a survival. So of course, for us, it's extremely important that how do we manage and how do we cope with the impacts of climate change. At the same time, there's always this narrative that listen, Pakistan is not a very high emission economy. We should not care about our emissions, and I agree with this, and we will cover some of that historical element as well in this conversation. How do we bring equity and justice? But we also have to recognize that Pakistan is the fifth largest population. Our emission footprint actually has been growing at a very fast rate, almost 100% in the last 10 years. In absolute numbers, I think we're probably the 18th highest emitter in the world as well. So even though we might feel that the footprint isn't there, but it is growing. So we really have to think about how do we want our future to be? Like how do we set up a future that allows us to take opportunities from this as well? And then the other thing that we look at when we look at climate, when you look at Pakistan, we are a very young country. Young country because 65% of our population is under 30. So it gives us a very different feel to it. And so this, of course, we look at climate as a challenge, but I think this opens a tremendous opportunity for us that how do we engage our young force? How do we train them? How do we develop the right skills that are fit for the future? And again, just to give you some idea, some research, I looked at some stats and the World Economic Forum just released its report, Future of Jobs for 2025. And they said that one of the fastest growing jobs are going to be for farm workers. And when they say farm workers, what they're trying to say is that we really will be focusing on how do we produce sustainable food? How do we feed a population that will, one day exceed 10 billion? And Pakistan being an agriculture country, is really at the forefront. And so a lot of that transition is going to happen because, of the climate, of the environment. The way we were working before will no longer be applicable. So when we talk about these green transitions, when we talk about these green transition, one other thing that we're seeing is that a lot of companies, and this is global, not just in Pakistan, a lot of companies, a lot of businesses in their job posting are now putting in green skills as one of the requirements. And when you look at the number of people who are actually applying, you see a massive gap. So what it's showing us that there is more demand for green skills, but those skills are not really there. And then, for example, only 1 in 8 workers possesses one green skill. So imagine that whatever work we're doing, 7 out of 8 people don't have any green skills. So we have to start thinking about, how do we build that opportunity? How do we make sure that when we talk about climate change, when we talk about climate change transition, where will the people come from? And that's been the biggest challenge. Whenever I speak to anyone, okay, we need to do this, we need to have clean energy, or we need funding for a climate project, the next question is, who's going to do this? Who has the talent? And so if we want to progress in that way, if we want to make sure that we are climate resilient, I think what's really important is that we build the right talent. And this is what we're going to discuss in this panel. But then also, and hopefully we'll pick this up within the panel as well, but the next question that comes in is like, what is a definition for green skills? Like, what do we mean by green talent? What is a green workforce? And I looked it up, and there isn't one definition. Everyone has their own definition of what those green skills are. But broadly, it just means that it's the knowledge, it is the abilities, the values, the attitudes needed to live in, develop, and support a sustainable and resource-efficient society. So in simple word, it means, how do we build a low-emission, resilient sector where people, planet, and the economy thrives? So it's not just about hard skills, it's about your attitudes as well. How do we perceive this climate? Often we negate it. We say, no, it's not very important for us. We have to focus on development. So how do we build the right attitudes? And then finally, something that we have to recognize is that when we look at climate, often we think about climate or environment as a technological solution. Or, we'll build the right technology, we'll have green energy, or we'll get clean transportation and that would solve the problem. But we have to recognize at the very heart of climate sustainability are people. So how do we make sure that whatever policies, whatever actions we're taking are focused on those people? So for example, when temperature increases, we have crop yields falling, which actually leads to hunger. So everything that happens in the environment, in the climate, eventually leads back to people. And so I think that's a very important thing that we want to pick up. So those are some of the things that I think we want to discuss here, that how do we really develop green skills? So we have this wonderful panel here, and I'll just give you a quick structure how I want to run this. I'm going to pose everyone like a one question, and we'll go through that question, and then we'll come back with another question as well. But then really I want to spend the last 15 minutes, 20 minutes talking to the audience. So, as they're speaking, please, think of the questions you want to ask. Because this is an opportunity to discuss this, but I also often feel that it's not just about the panelists sitting here. I think a lot of people have knowledge here as well. I see a lot of young people as well. So, bring your questions. What are the needs? What are the gaps? And what do you want? What do you want to hear, right? So on that note, I'm going to turn first to Khadija Amer. And I want to start with the big picture, right? Because I think when we talk about green skills, higher education has an extremely important role to play. And Khadija has an impressive profile. She's part of the largest private education network in Pakistan, and is also on the board of several others, right? And she herself has studied education as well. So when you have so many students under your wing, I think there is a sense of responsibility that starts to come in, that you have to do more. So my question for you is, how do you see, what's the role of higher education? How can it prepare students to address the challenges and the opportunities of the future, and especially from a green skills perspective?
Thank you, Abrar. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I'm Khadija Amer. It's absolutely delightful to see how many people are interested in green skills and education. We're absolutely packed right now. Thank you for your question, Abrar. I envision universities as a place where you go to not just learn skills, but also you learn how to learn. So my answer is basically around all of those things. First of all, it's so important to embed what you called green skills across all disciplines at a university. This means both technical and non-technical. Technical could be something as somebody who's studying engineering as soon as they graduate, they should be able to go and install a solar panel, for example. They should be able to go work in a wastewater treatment plant. All of these things, basically having somebody who's a ready-made human capital investment and insert them in renewable energy and the various renewable energy and other things that exist in the industry. What's also important is the non-technical skills. So you have things like being creative, having problem-solving abilities, having design thinking abilities. I think the most important two things for me to teach students is how to collaborate with different people, which is where your interdisciplinary skills come in. What's also really, really important, and perhaps the most important thing, is learning how to be adaptable. So this is where how to learn comes into play. Because at the rate at which things and technology is changing, it's so important to know how to adapt to it. So if you look at 1995 and 2010, if you look at that 15-year period, think of all of the technological change that happened during that. You went from dial-up modems, which it looks like a lot of people in our audience will remember what that was. And then you moved on to high-speed internet. And you also have the invention of social media. So if you look at that change in that 15-year period, in 2024, with AI becoming more adoptable, you're actually seeing that same amount of technological change happening in a fraction of that time. So it's actually astounding. So for me, adaptability and teaching students how to learn and be adaptable becomes one of the most important things that you can teach them, especially at a higher education institute. What's also really interesting is how how universities are being given a framework to operate within and to make sustainable development goals, for example, an important part of their curriculum, but also as a way of how they operate within their communities. Increasingly, you will see recycling programs at universities. You have University of Indonesia, they have a green metric ranking. So that actually ranks how green a university is and how they're teaching students to adapt and be better at even imparting green skills. You have Times higher education rankings, and universities in Pakistan are more often than not part of this impact ranking that they do with sustainable development goals. So it's all of those things combined give us a really good footing in terms of how to face challenges for the future. The second thing that I'd like to touch upon is the importance of experiential skills. I had a professor recently who would always start every class with saying, "How do you learn how to ride a bike? Do you read a book about it? Do you spend hours researching theories on how to ride a bike? Is there a study of learning how to ride a bike called bicycology?" I'm not aware of any. You learn how to ride a bike by actually riding a bike. One of the things that we do at UCP, our university in Lahore, is this out of thin air experiential program where we get students from different disciplines together. So you'll grab a kid from computer science, you'll grab somebody from marketing, for example, pharmacy or chemistry. You put them together and you make them work on a problem, and their goal is to make a game. Now, the computer science kids can't really sit there and code, but they all have to learn how to work together and collaborate to make a tangible board game to teach others about a problem and its solutions. It's also really important to think about industry and how academia can work with industry to solve problems, even if it's something as small as taking the byproduct of an industry. So for example, in Punjab, denim industry is quite big. So you'll have, when you wash the denim, you'll get a byproduct. It's this white colored bajri. It's like little white pebbles. What happens is, at the university, one of the uses that we found is we take those white pebbles, we mix it with a little bit of cement, and we're essentially making bricks out of that byproduct, bricks that don't need to be baked. So if you leave Lahore and you see the brick kilns and you see all of the smoke that's being emitted, you're essentially negating the need for baking bricks. So we're pressure testing them. We hope to make some structures out of them. But I think in all of those ways, it becomes all the more important to keep higher education in mind when we're thinking of ways to, face the challenges that we are undoubtedly going to face.
Well, thank you so much, Khadija. And I think one of the points that you raise, and we see that a lot with students, is that they want to work with real problems. Because you can teach them sustainability, but then they're like, okay, I've done all of this. Who's the agent here? Who will take this forward? And I think we're realizing that on the other hand, you have companies that have real problems and you have students that are passionate about this. So I think bridging the two really makes a difference. So I think that experiential learning, but building those cross-disciplinary teams are really important. So thank you so much for giving us this higher education perspective. But now I want to come to Uzma. Yusuf, and Uzma Yusuf works for Cambridge International. She's the country director. With the Cambridge University Press, and she's been recently appointed as the Global Ambassador for Climate Education by Cambridge, but also working a lot on the youth perspective. And I want to go from higher education back to young people because often it's said that our training should really start at early childhood. This is the time when we should be learning those soft skills. It's so often harder when you try to transfer those skills at a later stage. So Uzma, I'm very curious that as when you're looking at early childhood, like what are some of the strategies that you at Cambridge International are developing, and when should we start really working with children, and what sort of skills do you think we should be developing when it comes down to building the right curriculum?
Thank you, Abrar. And I'm really glad that you asked what should we be doing, because that is something that we've been talking about for a long time, and I think we have been talking about the importance of early starts. So I think when you look at developing a curriculum or developing a whole child as they go into different challenges in higher stages of their life, the foundational years are extremely important. It's established around the world that the highest rate of return on education is in early years. So we start as early as 3. So 3 years is when the Cambridge Early Years program starts. So if you're talking about curriculum per se for climate change, so if you look at the knowledge and skills, the cause and effect side of it. So for example, at age 3, our curriculum would kind of encourage the child to look at how clear the sky is, what color is the sky. Then you go to age 5 plus, and then you look at things like gases, how humans impact, and so on and so forth. But I think the most important thing that we can teach children in schools early on is we need to teach them fewer skills and fewer concepts in greater depth. We need them to master those skills so that they're confident in applying them to climate, to AI, to solving the problems of the world, whatever it is. And then communication, collaboration, responsibility, and dealing with each other. So how we do that from a climate perspective, for example, is that we've looked at our whole spectrum from ages 3 to 18 up to the A level. So we gradually build these things up. But the other important thing that we realize and we're raising awareness on is that we need to focus most on the age group 3 to 14. That is when you have the liberty to let children develop on their own pace. Human child, that age group, 3 to teen years, 5 to teen years and on, is supposed to be a slow growth process. We have spurts, and then that's the time when you can let children grow at their own pace. We also realize that because of the climatic changes, which are very real, as you said, there's a lot of climate anxiety. So we let children into this scenario of gloom and doom, and the British Business Association and a lot of British psychiatric associations have come back and said, Gen Z, we know they are struggling with mental health, but now a lot of that has become around climate change. A lot of them were impacted post-COVID because a lot of them didn't get to school or to colleges like we did. We were much luckier. So similarly, we also have to look at the well-being aspect. So we have a well-being curriculum that looks at all types of support and mental health also, and climate anxiety is coming up as one of very important strands. Similarly, the children, one thing is to know what's going on. If you look at all around us, we know there's a lot which is wrong and shouldn't happen. So understanding is one thing, but activism and supporting change when they become agents of change and actually change things is the other very important thing. And for that, we have various other curriculums like global perspectives and where they work together. We started at primary, it goes on, and other such things. The third most important thing is working with each other. You know, you can't solve the climate or any crisis without learning how to work in teams, how to collaborate, and those are very, very important fundamental skills. The problem that we face, and it has to be with teachers, it's a bigger challenge dealing with adults like myself, and telling ourselves that we need to unlearn and then learn. So I think teacher training becomes a bigger challenge. But the other problem is the overloading of stuff which is not necessary, which is not leaving enough room for our children to, kind of breathe, reflect, and be able to come up to solutions for themselves. So that's the Cambridge approach, where we look at the cause and effect, the science of it, the context of it through various different subjects. And by the way, we've greened the whole curriculum. And we are working with around 6-7 governments to work on greening their curriculum as well.
Thank you, Uzman. I think one thing we hope and note is that climate should not be separate from anything and everything that we do. It should be so integral in our learning that it has to be incorporated. So just hearing that you are making that effort and you focus on ages where we actually learn, and then that becomes part of our life. So that's wonderful to know, and we'll build on that as well. So I now want to move on. We've looked at higher education, we've looked at curriculum, but then we also have to get an insight of what is the role of government here, and how are they developing the skills. But so we're fortunate to have Ahmed here, who he also has a private sector perspective as well. He's worked in the private sector, so he can understand, because one of the challenges we always see is this mismatch between the skills that are being trained and then private sector saying, actually, I don't need those skills. We don't really need, this is the skills we need. So I want to understand that, what is the role of Punjab Skills Development Fund in this? How do you bridge this together? But just kind of a brief introduction for Ahmed as well. He is the CEO of the Punjab Skills Development Fund, but again, with extensive experience working in the private sector. So it'll be wonderful to hear your insights. What can the private sector do? What specific programs are you implementing to prepare young workers for the jobs in the green transition sector? I know those are big questions.
Yes, hard to cover all of them, but anyway. So look, so the whole debate between whether skills should follow industry or industry should follow skills is an interesting one, right? For a country like ours, where we don't have that much capital available, where the economy is not that big, we unfortunately can't be leaders in any of this, right? So we don't have the luxury of doing innovative things and then hoping that the market will and these people will wait, right? These are bottom of the pyramid people. These are what we call the young and vulnerable, right? So we can't really invest in them hoping that the market will follow. So ultimately, what we end up doing is looking to industry. What are the skills that you need? And every time we look at industry, the answer is either textile or the answer is either agriculture, right? And again, we as if you look at our economy and you break it down, the problem is that in the value chain of goods, we're at the very, very low end. So even in the industries that we're big in, we're not doing any high-end development. So, but what really helps us is our export. So when you talk about exports, the buyers outside, they mandate a certain amount of green product, and green processes. So now it falls to only the exporters who are really who can really afford these skills or who can afford trained professionals in these skills. So just to sort of sum it up, the government, all it can do is promote investment in industries that are green, and sort of make it lucrative for industry to be set up and run in a way that helps the environment and all the sustainable things that we want to do. Unfortunately, uh, the political environment is tough, right? People don't want to invest in Pakistan. We had the currency crisis, we had the economic crisis, and obviously, if you go further back in the past, it's been one after the other. So, this is where we look to, the SIFC or the Export Promotion Bureau or, the Board of Investment that, Punjab has one as well, and there's one at the federal level. They really need to, figure out what the correct industry is, and then it has to trickle down to all the government, right? So right now, I can tell you the things that the government has mandated for us are environment is a big portion. Export is a big portion, so completely agnostic on what the industry is, but as long as it's export based. Digital is the third one that the government is really focused on. And if you look at all of these things, this is where the green skills are going to be most used. Now the problem comes that how do you train them, and what is it that you need to train them for, and how employable they'll be. So that's sort of it's early days.
It's the next challenge, but in some way, when I hear these conversations, I feel that actually we're sitting on this big opportunity, because what we're saying is that we have this industry that's focused on certain natural resources. We want to increase our exports, so we really have to start looking at what does the world need. And the more and more I see about these things, I feel that they're demanding sustainable products, and I think we sit in a excellent opportunity having these complete supply chains. Let's say from, even if you look at textile, right? We cultivate cotton and then we export our products. So I guess my ambition would be, how do we declare Pakistan as sustainable Pakistan, right? Because I think we will be meeting someone else's need. But I'll come back to that. I want to move on to Linda Poppe, right? Is that correct? Perfect. So we're hearing skills from an educational perspective, from a private sector perspective as well. But I think often we miss out on kind of the real actors, which are communities. And in Pakistan, those, or globally, communities sit at the very heart of this challenge. They're the most vulnerable, and often they're not engaged. So we're very fortunate to have Linda here, and I looked at her organization, Survival International, as well. And I'd love for you to say a little bit on that organization as well, in terms of the community building aspect that you're doing. And so I would love to learn from you, how do you actually build the right community? And how do you get this engagement and this awareness that goes just beyond young people to the affectees as well? And what's that communication that needs to be set up, so we focus on problems that are actually real, rather than focusing on things that we think are real?
I really like that last point, what's real and what we think is real. Yes, I work for Survival International, which is the global movement for the rights of indigenous people. So we're a human rights organization, basically. And you may wonder, what's she doing on a panel about education and green workforce? Well, I actually talk to a lot of young people who really care about the environment and climate, and which is fantastic. But often when I talk to them, I'm also a bit, disillusioned or traumatized, or very, a bit afraid maybe as well. Maybe let me explain you why. What we do at Survival, so there's, we work on several cases, and one of them, for example, is the indigenous people in Halmahera in Indonesia who live in a rainforest, who is being cut down, and their livelihoods are destroyed. They are attacked. They can't manage to feed themselves, even though they're very sustainable people. And this rainforest is logged to produce ingredients for batteries for electric cars, which is a terrible thing, because you have a community which lives quite sustainably, and they're being pushed off the land for a supposed solution for other people to drive supposedly sustainable cars. Or we have a campaign where we address the colonial and racist ideas that we have in conservation and how we protect nature. And we criticize, for example, organizations like the WWF or the Wildlife Conservation Society, who say they protect nature, but in fact they're also pushing off the best guardians of nature off their lands via their support for protected areas. No, this is the background I have. And then I talk to young people, and often if they really care about the environment, they, for example, say, you know, well, I want to become an engineer to work at BMW or Volkswagen and help them to create electric vehicles. And then I think, oh, yeah, well, or they tell me they want to become an environmentalist and work for a conservation organization like WWF because they believe it's something that's, you know, right, and it will, you know, fight climate change and fight biodiversity loss. And then again, I'm thinking, oh, you know, maybe that's not actually what we need to have a greener future. And this is why I think what is really important as a skill for young people is to, you know, question these ideas that we are being told about how to protect climate and how to protect the environment. It's often, you know, big companies that say they want the best qualified people, and then the best qualified people go there and think, you know, maybe they do something good by working on an electric vehicle, but maybe they're not. You know, young people need to understand that, of course, all these organizations have an interest in recruiting the best of the best and the very energetic people, but you need to take a step back and think, you know, what kind of system am I actually serving when I take these supposedly green jobs or do these, you know, work on these supposedly green solutions. And that's why I think it's very important that young people question the problems. You know, what has gotten us into this mess of climate change and biodiversity loss? Who are the people that have gotten us into this mess, even though they say, you know, they're now doing the best for the planet? And if you question that, then maybe you decide, well, the skills I need are not to work for BMW to help them produce electric cars, but maybe it's another skill. You know, maybe maybe I'm a chef somewhere, so I think about sourcing my resources more sustainably. But it's really about questioning the ideas that we have about what are the solutions for or against climate change and against biodiversity protection, and then deciding, you know, what are actually the skills that I need.
You kind of raise a great point, right? That it's about being thoughtful. Like, you could work for any organization, private sector, non-profits, government, but it's about how are you bringing those skills in, and how are you, as I said, you know, making sure that, you know, you're questioning the organization that you work for as well, of what they're doing. I think I'm picking out that, you know, we shouldn't silo the organization. People say, oh, I don't want to work for private sector. And my encouragement is you have to work for private sector to understand their perspective. There's no bad or good companies. There's no black and white. Everyone's trying, so how do we help each other? Just on that note, I want to do another quick round of second questions, and we'll keep it brief. And then I do want to open up for the audience, but I wanted to ask, maybe pose a question to everyone here, that we are talking about green skills here. So I just want everyone to raise their hand if they think they have a green skill, or they are working in an industry that is green. How many people? Okay, very few. My next question is, how many people do want to develop a green skill and want to work for an industry with green? Okay, so it's gone up. So we see a gap here already. That, you know, there are very few people who work on it, but there's more need, and I think that's what we're picking out. So on that note, I want to come back to Khadija, and I know you started to touch on this, and we started to go on the industry as well. I think it's so important to think about private sector, because I think they're the ones who are actually driving the economy. You know, our goal for economic development is, you know, how do we double our exports, and that's not going to happen just, you know, without impacts on sustainability. So what is the role of higher education in closely collaborating with private sector to solve these challenges, and what sort of conversations do you actually have with them?
Abrar, that's a question every single higher education institute debates upon. And when you speak to people in the industry about collaborating with higher education, it's really interesting because it oftentimes becomes a blame game, right? The industry will say, oh, their solutions are too theoretical, they're not practical enough. And, academia people will say the industry isn't really taking what we're saying on board. To be very clear, in my perspective, as being part of a private education company, I think the onus here is on academia. I think industry is doing fine as it is. And you wouldn't have massive research wings for companies all around the world if this collaboration was happening in a perfect world. Let's say that. But the onus is on academia. I think the industry wants one of two things, right? It's either to increase revenues or cut down on costs. And I think making it that plain and simple for people in academia, and I think you'll start to see results. When it comes to things like sustainability and innovation, it really comes down to three things. It comes down to making a product that's entirely new, and the Higher Education Commission in Pakistan has given us an environment to kind of do whatever we want in. So they've mandated an ORIC department in every higher education institute. That's the Office of Research, Innovation, and Commercialization. So if you have somebody working on a really great product, that new first kind of innovation to commercialize it, right, for industry. They've also mandated that you have incubation centers for students or people in academia who have business ideas for them to work on them as well. So it's really interesting when it comes to industry. You could have, and you have really great examples of what's happening in Pakistan as well. You have industry coming to universities to ask them to make specific degree programs, oftentimes for graduate degrees. So UET does a really good job. Rayon Energy is an energy company, and UET makes specific programs for them, essentially to have market-ready students ready to go and work in that company. You also have places like Angro Energy, who provide internships for students in engineering or environmental sciences to work on that as well. And then you can actually have research and innovation hubs in universities as well. So at our university, an example is you can have a wastewater treatment plant, and what we're doing is we're using nanocarbon filters to take whatever wastewater is produced on campus, you take it through the filter. We have third-party testing with PCSIR, and essentially you can reuse that water, not for drinking purposes yet, but essentially for agricultural or hygiene and sanitation purposes. So all of these things are happening, and I think it'll take a few years to see the effects of it come into play and practice. But essentially, when it comes to sustainability and innovation, it's making a new product, making something more efficient, or making something more cheaply than it was previously. I think if we focus on those three areas, we'll be in a good enough place to expand on them.
Absolutely. And I think universities are wonderful places where you can actually experiment. You can't go in an industry and say, I'm going to try this and maybe it works. Are you able to fund this innovation? But this is where you can learn, you can experiment, you can fail, but it also gives that those skilling to the students, because now they can go out and say, we actually worked on this problem. Even if it's not their degree, they would have experience. If I think about the green skills, suddenly we have a tick in the green skill. Oh, we worked on energy efficiency. So I think those are things that I think can really help. I'll jump to Ahmed here, because I think it links back to thinking about this larger goal of skills development. And maybe you haven't started doing that, but if you were to think about your impact, what are the things that you would look at if you're developing the Skills Development Council, or you're developing this fund? What sort of impact is important for you, and how do you measure that impact so we know things are actually happening?
That's actually an easy one. Impact is for us very simple. It's an increase in income, right? Because at the end of the day, as a skill development organization, unfortunately, the intellectual stimulation and sort of the intellectual growth is a little outside our mandate. So when we look at pure skill development, and especially the target market that we have, for us, it's very pure. Have we been able to increase their income opportunities. And yes, you can sort of bifurcate that into, do they have better working environments? Are they working in a, and when I say better working environments, I meant, more sustainable and sort of more climate effective working environments. Do they have a better future for them and the next generation? But for us, there are two ways to cut this, right? One is, giving them pure green skills, right? KG, okay, you can work in a climate efficient industry, whether it's water treatment, solar, energy development. But the other is, no matter what you do, like this sort of soft skills, or sort of that no matter what you do, what we've done is we've introduced a component in every program that we do. So even if you're training to be a beautician, how can you reduce your waste? How can you use more energy efficient appliances? Everything. So we're looking at it both ways, and that's the government's view as well. Don't just think of green skills as to work in a green industry, but also that across industry, how can you improve things?
And I think going forward, it'll be really helpful to get more and more information and data, right? Because we know that what's not measured, sadly, is not valued. So unless and until we don't get more information, which I think would be a wonderful thing to get a base.
Answer that, right? So what we've done is we've digitalized our entire program. So everything that we do. We started recording all our programs. So now you have a video library that you can do it. And every student who registers, they get paid digitally. Every TSP who registers with us, they get, so all the payments have been digitalized. All the training impartment, all the assessment, all the feedback, everything is recorded digitally. And obviously, the depth of data that it gives you, like simple things, their geography, their geolocation, which training center they went to, how many classes did they miss, the impact, and then we follow this for years, right? So anybody we train, we follow their trajectory for years. So every 6 months we do a follow-up tracer study or an impact study. So yes, we're very conscious of that as well.
That's good to know, Ahmed. And I'll come back now to Uzma. I guess my question is, we understand we need to develop the curriculum, right? It's we know it's so important that we go in the foundational years. What sort of challenges are you facing, and how can we scale this effort across our entire education system?
I'm so glad you asked the question, because yes, developing the curriculum is the less challenging bit, because universities like Cambridge are so well plugged in our own, and then we also work with all the best universities all over the world. I think implementation is the biggest challenge, and I think the focus at the right places. For example, you will see a lot of effort and a lot of emphasis and even resources when students get to O levels, IGCSEs, and A levels. But you will not have similar conversations for their primary years. In a lot of schools, when you go, you will see the least trained teachers are in primary years. And since I'm informally involved with the government, we were looking at something, and the interesting bit that came out was that a good primary teachers, so when they're very good, they get promoted to higher years. And in the world where where education works really well, you have the most qualified people for early years, because that's where it makes the most impact. The other thing I want to point out is teacher training. I think the need for great teachers is very, very important. Your basic numeracy, literacy skills. And you said the challenge is to come at a consensus where we all agree this is what is needed. हम बात करते हैं, we all say we want to do this, and then it goes off in thin air. So in some of this, we will need governmental support, because at the end of the day, private schools, Cambridge, other such organizations, we can only do so much in terms of bringing those regulatory frameworks. We are working a lot on raising awareness amongst parents. For example, we introduced music, which has a very clear connection with mathematics and mental health of children. But a lot of parents would say it's a waste of time. How well is he done in maths? Well, that child ends up not doing so well in maths either later on. So we're constantly struggling, and as a parent, I'm very, very nervous, because I'm experimenting with all these things with my 7-year-old twins. So most times I'm like, these children are going to come around and tell me you were mad, and So I think that pressure, and if we are able to build that common understanding, this is how we want to support our children. Because if you look at the last 40, 50 years, everybody will tell you this is how we do it. But what did you do? What did we do? We plundered the planet. We ruined the country. So we have to do something differently. So for me, the most important challenge is to come to consensus. Something's got to give, something's got to change, and that too at a very early stage. And this is not cost intensive. It doesn't cost money to teach them less and let them play and have a mind which can discern. Because a colleague here was talking about the effect of electronic vehicles. Similarly, if you don't have a questioning mind, how will you ask? And if we keep on telling our children, chup kar jao, agli class, padna hai, next class, next piano lesson, we have not given them time off screens and otherwise. Just one last thing I'd like to say, for example, and overall our national debate or our conversations have to be wholesome. You will hear 1,000 conferences about AI, but you will not hear about the environmental impact of AI. That America is now recommissioning their decommissioned nuclear power plants. That's the amount of energy AI takes. Because the industry doesn't want you to hear it. And we will not read enough to know that this is a problem.
Yeah, and I think what I'm picking up absolutely, what's important is to question about these things, right? That how do we build a consensus what's really needed? And I think bringing it back to the economy is extremely important. Often we miss that element. We don't have the right stakeholders. So, how does this help us with our economic development? How do we meet those needs? And I think once we have that chain, like who's demanding this, it really starts to pick up. Because suddenly it's not green scales, it's not additional. There isn't a trade-off. It's often that this is exactly what we need. We need sustainable material. You're talking about we need a sustainable denim. And the moment you need sustainable denim, it's no longer sustainable denim, it's the denim, right? But Linda, I'd love to come to you because I think there is something we often don't talk about is this whole concept of, your work as well on decolonizing, right? That there's a historical equity issue here. People often talk about it, okay, fine, how come you've thrown everything to a country like Pakistan? It's not our problem. We didn't create this challenge. The West should be supporting this. But when we go back, it's how the system has been set up, right? It's always been extractive. Our resources are being used elsewhere. Someone else consumes it. We produce it. Yet we are the ones that have to focus on this. So I'd love your thought and your work on how do we make this more equitable?
Ooh. I wish I would have the answer to that. Well, I think first of all, it's really to make clear to ourselves that these structures exist. Like a lot of the initiatives that, for example, Survival works on, like carbon credits, which are there to make industries carbon neutral, supposedly carbon neutral, are very often, if you trace back these ideas, they come up from some company that made some study in what's more or less the easiest way for them to get out of their actual responsibilities. So we have all these things that are developing and that are often, very prominent. These are the things that are most talked about on international level and in media. And these are the solutions that we see, but they come often from people that have a certain interest in these solutions versus other solutions. And I think that's why I was also trying to say that in my first point that you really need to think about, so, what are the problems and what do I want to contribute? And maybe it is, a more critical approach to things and maybe coming up with your own ideas instead of always following these things that you're constantly being told again, that are important and that should happen and that are internationally very recognized, but really to take a step back and think about your own experience, look a little bit at history, what has what has happened and how has it always been, and why are the same people now telling me this is a green solution? And I think that is really important to develop that critical thinking. And I know that's also quite hard for people that want to contribute something, because it's such a difficult thing to do, and how do you get out of that system? But I think we need to start at some point, because otherwise the mess is just going to get worse.
Yeah, and I think sometimes you have to understand that there are structural issues. It's not about what's happening, but what's the structure in which we operate. And I would recommend, there's a very nice book I read recently called The Nutmeg's Curse. And it really goes back to our kind of focus on resources. that, historically we were after spices. And that notion of going somewhere in someone's home, extracting their resources, going elsewhere is how the world is operating. That's what fossil fuels are about. That's what coal is. We're all going and saying, what is it that we need? But in that process, what are we doing with the communities? What are we doing with the people there? And I think that's why for Pakistan it's so important that we take ownership, right? So I'm going to pause here. I think we've spoken a lot. I'd love I'm going to pick like 3-4 questions. So make your questions brief, and then we'll see who wants to pick them up. So let's take about 4 questions, and I'll write them down. Yeah, we can start here. And if you can give your name as well.
I'm Ajaz. I'm mechanical engineer from Nust University. Great panel, great discussion. Thank you. Government has approved 2 policies. Our energy policy says that energy mix and renewable energy share, which is only at 5%, should be 30% by year 2030. We are lagging behind. And other policy or project is approved by government is Udan project. It is $1 trillion project in 5 years, and green energy and environment are part of it. My question is from Ahmed Saab, how skill development department will provide low, semi-skilled and highly skilled workforce for these projects to make these government policies successful? What is your plan, please?
Thank you. Next question. I'll take 3. So you have to take. Yeah, I'll take 1 here, and then we'll go back as well. Because I want to make sure we. Yeah.
I have a question for Khadija, which is, hi. So I have a question for Khadija. You talked about how technology has really changed over the last decade. I was curious how you are preparing students for the new world with AI.
Who else? Maybe you'll pick up. I'll come back to you.
Hi there. So my question is that whenever we try to use any green energy, there's like a green tax. So I don't know if you've read Bill Gates' book, but it's actually very hard to shift to green technology because it's so expensive to make those same goods and services. So what exactly can we do in any industry in terms of policy that we make those things more competitive or people want those things more?
We'll take 1 more.
Yeah, great discussion. My question is from Linda, as she's focusing on indigenous communities. What if we look at higher education and the lower education, it is basically creating the mindset which originally created this problem, green. And you mentioned colonization. We already know that all those civilizations and societies which kept the green skills are overtaken by the industrialization of education as such. So how we are going to solve the problem when it actually created it? Thank you.
We'll try. So what I've understood is first to Ahmed, how do we make our skills relevant to the policies? Are you talking to policymakers, or is there? We often feel there's a big disconnect. So what's your action there?
No, so obviously there is, right? The challenge that we face is, every time you talk about something new or something innovative, what ends up happening is you get all these foreign consultants in, and all the sort of high-end workforce ends up being imported. So all the money that you get ends up going back outside, right? So for me, that's one of the bigger challenges. That the problem is not what to do. The problem is trying to make sure that our local workforce benefits from it. And after the first 1 or 2 projects, everything is done locally. So that sort of knowledge transfer or that skills transfer needs to happen. Because, let's face it, we're a little behind. The bigger problem, so we do talk to policymakers, and obviously when this happens, we do get notes and everything that, look, are you on board with government policy? So there is, at the government level, there is integration. So it comes with our political system. So that really helps. The other big challenge is going to be that all of this money is going to be in the form of some loan from some foreign bank or some foreign investor or something. We already have a IPP problem. We already have a circular debt problem. The bigger problem, getting the skills part. Like I said, the challenge is making sure that we localize the knowledge, and then in years to come, by 2030 or 2035, can we go to Africa or other countries and then teach them and use our skills there, because that's the big challenge, right? We have not been able to develop anything that is innovative and gone outside and export it. We're still at the very low end, right?
The best way to develop challenges are where the problems are. And I think since we face these challenges, like I often ask people, like, how come we're not the flood experts of the world? We should be exporting those skills to the rest of the world to learn how to manage floods. We experience it all the time. So why are we asking anyone else to come in? So I think those are things that we have to think about. Quickly, Khadija, for you, it's this big question, right? Things are evolving so fast. How are you keeping pace with that?
It comes back to that core skill of adaptability and making students adaptable enough to not only use new technologies, but then once they're out of university, they should know how to use the technology to get what they want. What I found in education was that everybody was a little bit scared of AI when it first came around. But I feel the teachers and instructors, especially at universities, have adapted beautifully to AI. So, for example, you have less assessment methods that are based off of essay writing, for example. You have teachers asking students more constructive questions. You have teachers encouraging students to use AI to get their answers. Also, it's really funny how it depends on the subject matter as well. So I know you can't use ChatGPT in whatever form it is right now in chemistry studies because it gives you completely wrong answers. The way that we've done computer science, the way that we've adapted is we have brought in more student like teaching fellows, basically teaching assistants. So when a student writes code, we actually are able to say, okay, can you show me what happens when you change this line of code? So if they can do it, that means they understand it. If they can't, that probably means they've used ChatGPT. But oftentimes, what happens is we sometimes, this is important, and this will be the last thing I say. What happens is that there's often a doomsday scenario painted, especially when it comes to Pakistan and climate change. We are the 8th most vulnerable country with climate change. We have, I think our median age right now is 20.4. 2/3 of our workforce is under the age of 30. This is, like you said in the beginning, it's a liability as well as an amazing opportunity, right? If we are able to upskill this younger generation. But there's a time crunch. There's a critical time period, which is 2047. That's the time period for us. After that, the median age might be 30. More of our workforce will be over the age of 30. I think that's important to keep in mind. Pakistan, the state of Pakistan, has had one successful story when it comes to all of this in the past. It was when we made the nuclear program. The odds were stacked against us at that time as well, right? Our economy was in shambles. We had sanctions levied against us. Again, the education system wasn't great at that time, but we were able to do it. I think we need to treat climate and education with the same national security criticality. It's that critical to our national security.
I think what I'm getting is the approach. We're not talking about the technology, but it's like, how do we make sure that we... Okay, I'm going to quickly, I know we have 2 other questions. I want to do one quick round of questions as well. I'm going to answer your question because I think what you were talking about was, how do we make sure that financing is there to support these emerging technologies as well? Like, how do we get taxes? And I think that's where subsidies, governments have a role to play. Okay.
It's technology life cycle, right? Every new technology.
Yeah, exactly. There is absolutely there is a there is a life cycle, as as Ahmed is saying. There is a life cycle. There are transitions, and every transition comes with a cost. I think the question is, who's going to bear that cost, and how do we make sure those transitions are equitable and profitable? So we're seeing those changes. But you're right. I think we need government. And then Linda, you had there was a question for you. I didn't understand it properly, but I was kind of picking up like what's the role of higher education? What's the expectation there, right?
Or was it indigenous knowledge?
Indigenous knowledge in
Yeah.
higher education.
Yes. Yeah. I think. Yeah.
Now we have industrialized our education. That actually created the problem.
Yes.
So how we expect the mindset of the education which created the problem to solve it?
It's a great question. There's something very beautiful about indigenous knowledge, which often we don't see, or local knowledge. It's often looked down upon, as being unscientific or maybe superstition, which is a shame because I think the genius in humanity isn't, how that we know how to, I don't know, use a cell phone, but it's about the diversity of solutions for problems that we find in humankind. And indigenous ways of life are different solutions to problems. So indigenous peoples do things differently, maybe because they found a different way to deal with a problem. And I think we need to understand that this is such a valuable thing to have these different kinds of solutions. And we're harming ourselves by, pushing mainstream education and, racism basically on indigenous knowledge. And I think we've seen in Australia, for example, that they've given back the parts of fire management to indigenous people because they're so much better at it than the authorities for protected areas. So I think we need to understand it, not just because it's good for indigenous peoples if we respect it, but it's also good for us, and it's what makes us strong, the variety of ideas we have. Yeah, and how to do it? It's a terrible task, but we have had terrible tasks.
This will come back for later. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. I would have loved to take more questions in. We don't have enough time to sum this up, and it's not easy to sum up something that's so diverse, because we're looking at private sector, we're looking at curriculum, we're looking at higher education, but we want to make sure there's equity as well. But one thing I do want to say, and this is my one-liner always, is that I think Pakistan can be at the center of this. We have a young force, we have talented people, we have a challenge that we can experience from. I think we can take this to the rest of the world. And it's the same way that technology happened 20 years ago, that certain countries benefit, we could be the country that is helping the world become sustainable. So thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, panelists. Thank you.
Thank you.